Jarkeius Adside had only just celebrated his first birthday a month prior to his disappearance. According to his babysitter, he was kidnapped by 3 armed men during a robbery. However, investigators questioned her version of events. Jarkeius, who was nicknamed both Kyrie and Keisha, didn't exactly have the best start in life. We'll call him Kyrie going forward, as I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing Jarkeius correctly. He was born on the 30th of September 2000, and by the time of his disappearance on the 18th of October 2001, only a little over a year later, both his parents were in jail. He was being looked after by Gwendolyn Brown, a babysitter who lived in Miami, Florida. I'm assuming he didn't have any family nearby, or I assume he would have been looked after by them rather than a babysitter. I can't really find much information at all about Gwendolyn, so I'm assuming she was literally just a babysitter rather than a friend of the family or anything, or I think it would have specified this. I'm not 100% sure, particularly in America about 20 years ago, what the protocol would be for a baby whose parents were in jail, but it did seem a little bit odd to me that he was in the care of a babysitter. But like I say, I'm not sure if this was unusual, if the baby didn't have any family living nearby. On the morning of Kyrie's disappearance, he was left in the care of Gwen's live-in boyfriend, Jeffrey Cochran, while she walked her teenage daughter to the bus stop. According to the Charlie Project, Gwen said that the robbery took place while she was out, and upon her return home she was confronted by 3 armed men. However, another source, missingminors.com, implies that she was confronted by the men before she returned home and then forced into the house. Not sure which is correct. Either way, in the home, both Gwen and Jeff were bound with duct tape while the robbers demanded money. Unfortunately, there isn't much information at all online about this case, so there are some gaps in the timeline. I'm not really sure what happened between Gwen and Jeff being bound with duct tape and what followed. I'm not sure how much time passed even. Sources only state that at some point later, Gwen and Jeff heard a single gunshot. They eventually managed to free themselves, at which point it sounds like the suspects had left the house. They quickly realised that the house had been ransacked, that items were missing, but most importantly, Kyrie was gone, and he was never seen again after this. Here are the composite sketches of the 3 abductors. When police arrived at the scene, they found a blood-stained mattress and blood-soaked sheets. Blood was also found in other areas of the home, though I wasn't able to find out specifically where. The blood was later determined to be Kyrie's, leading investigators to believe that he was either seriously injured or killed in the incident. Police also found several grams of cocaine in the house and arrested Gwen and Jeff on drug charges. And that's about the extent of the information that I could find on this case. There were a few other sources, but some of them were blocked in my country, so I'll leave links in the description below, so if anyone is from America, maybe they could fill in some gaps. Investigators have made it clear that they are sceptical of Gwen and Jeff's account. I mean, you can hardly blame them. It did take them 2 hours after Kyrie's abduction to contact the police about this, but they claim that this is how long it took them to free themselves. If this is true, it must have been awful, particularly if Gwen and Jeff were aware that Kyrie had either been abducted or seriously injured in the incident. I can't imagine being tied up for 2 hours just not knowing what's going on. But the story just doesn't really make sense when you pick it apart. 3 men come to burgle a house, why would they shoot or kidnap a baby? It just doesn't make sense. I mean, they clearly wanted money, and I guess they could have taken Kyrie for a ransom, but surely they would have made that clear, and Gwen and Jeff would have no reason not to mention this. It has been suggested that maybe the burglars took Kyrie to sell to another family, but why would they injure him in any way if that was the case? The only other possibility I can think of is if they accidentally shot Kyrie, though I think this is pretty unlikely, and it makes no sense as to why they'd take the body with them after that. Surely it's just another way they could get caught if they had to hide a body after the fact. Another thing to consider is that the cocaine was still there when the police searched. I mean, I guess you can't necessarily assume that burglars would be selling or taking drugs, but if they just wanted money, I mean, there's a pretty easy way to make money right there. And surely you'd take cocaine to sell before you'd take a baby to sell, right? Early morning is an odd time to rob a house. I couldn't find the exact time it was supposed to have taken place, but Gwen says that she was walking her teenage daughter to the bus stop. Considering it was a Thursday morning, she could have been on her way to school. Going on a rough estimate of the time, I'm guessing it wasn't dark when it happened, and there probably would have been people about, either kids heading off to school or adults going to work. It just seems a strange time to commit a crime where there could be so many possible witnesses, but none of them came forward to support the burglary or kidnapping story. So if Gwen and Jeff were lying, what really happened? There are a few possibilities. Maybe Gwen and Jeff's story was partially true. Maybe Kyrie had been kidnapped, but not by some random unknown men for no reason whatsoever. We know that Gwen and Jeff were in possession of drugs. Maybe they owed a dealer some money and the dealer sent some guys around to claim that money. It doesn't really explain why Kyrie was kidnapped, but maybe they just took him until Gwen and Jeff paid back the money. Maybe Gwen and Jeff even sold drugs themselves and they were robbed because of this. But it does seem likely considering the cocaine was still there when police searched. You would think if it was anything drug related that the cocaine would have been taken as well, probably instead of Kyrie. Unless the drugs had been hidden well and were missed by the burglars but not the police. But even then, if you were tied up and you heard a gunshot and you were looking after a 1-year-old baby, surely you'd just give up the drugs to prevent anything escalating from there. I feel like it could be an important detail whether or not Gwen was ambushed while she was out or when she returned back to the home. I'm inclined to believe the latter, as Charlie Project seems like quite a reliable source to me, whereas I have never heard of the other source before. But if Gwen was ambushed while she was out, it could maybe suggest a personal attack as opposed to just someone randomly burgling a house, that the target was Gwen specifically. Not that it still couldn't have been a targeted event if she returned home to the house being burgled, it's just hard to say really. It has been suggested that the robbery could have been a front for the kidnapping, that they always intended on taking the baby but just kind of fronted it as a burglary. If that was the case, it would maybe be safe to assume that Gwen was targeted specifically, or the house specifically, whether or not they knew the suspects. It's hard to work out exactly what happened with the lack of information, but it sounds like either Gwen returned back to the home and was then ambushed and forced inside, or that when she returned home, Jeff was already tied up and they also tied her up after that. If they were waiting for Gwen, it would probably seem likely that she was the target, and would probably rule out kidnapping being the focus. But then if they were already in the house, wouldn't they just take Kyrie as soon as possible before another witness might have shown up? And like I said before, it does sound likely that they shot Kyrie if this version of events is to be believed, but why on earth would they shoot a baby that they intended to kidnap? Personally, I just don't really buy the kidnapping story, and I hate to say it, but I think it seems likely that Kyrie probably died that day. He clearly lost a lot of blood that day, and even if he was taken while he was still alive, it's hard to imagine the suspects taking him to the nearest A&E for treatment. So if Gwen and Jeff were responsible for Kyrie's death, the question is, was it intentional or accidental? Again, with such a lack of information, it is pretty hard to speculate. I couldn't find any information that suggested that Jeff or Gwen had abused Kyrie or any other children in the past. Gwen had a teenage daughter and I couldn't find any reports of any abuse with her or any other children. And that doesn't definitively mean they never have abused any children, but I just don't really want to go down that line of thinking when there's no evidence. So I don't think from the information that we've got that we can assume it was intentional. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that an individual could just snap without prior warning signs, particularly if they were under the influence, which Gwen and Jeff may well have been. Though killing a baby is not something that most people would ever be capable of under any circumstances. Jeff did have a criminal record at this time, though I can't find any specifics. It may not have been violent crimes, it might have just been non-violent drug charges. If Gwen and Jeff weren't child abusers and they didn't just snap one day and murder Kyrie, it must have been accidental. It seems pretty likely that Kyrie was shot. I imagine Gwen and Jeff told the police that they heard a gunshot because there was a gunshot, and they knew neighbours may have heard it, so they worked this into the story. But how could Kyrie have been shot accidentally? It seems pretty likely that either of the adults could have accidentally shot Kyrie, even under the influence of cocaine. It's not like cocaine's a hallucinogen. I mean, it can increase people's confidence and potentially make people more aggressive, but it's not like you'd just be seeing things that aren't there or anything. It doesn't really explain how you could accidentally kill a baby. I guess there's even a possibility that Gwen's daughter may have accidentally shot Kyrie. but her being able to go out shortly after and seem okay, I'm assuming, would be pretty unlikely. That makes me pretty sure that whatever happened after she left, and she probably has no idea about it. But then again, it does sound like Kyrie was not monitored by any child protective services, anything like that, so I don't know if we can be 100% sure that what happened actually happened on that day. I mean, I would assume that when police went to search the house and they found the bloodstained mattress, etc., that they probably concluded that it was blood from that day. But again, I couldn't find any mention of this specifically, so I guess we don't know for sure that whatever happened did actually happen on that day. Maybe Gwen and Jeff accidentally killed Kyrie in some other way. Maybe he accidentally ended up ingesting some cocaine and overdosed and this killed him. Then maybe Gwen and Jeff covered this up by shooting him and hiding the body and then making up the kidnapping story. But wouldn't it be easier to just hide the body and tell the kidnapping story without faking a shooting as well? It all just seems a bit of a stretch anyway. I mean, I don't know how anyone could just shoot a baby, even if they were already dead, unless they always intended on killing them anyway. It's even been suggested that Kyrie accidentally killed himself, so I guess he would have got hold of the gun and accidentally shot himself when he were playing with it, and then Gwen and Jeff just panicked and hid the body. But I don't even know if that would be possible for a 1-year-old child. And I guess they would still be responsible regardless if they left a gun out in the reach of a child. Personally, I do think Gwen and Jeff were responsible somehow for Kyrie's disappearance and probable death. But I just can't really say exactly how this would have happened or whether or not it was intentional. I mean, logically, no theory makes complete sense. It's just such a bizarre case. But I think the babysitters being responsible is infinitely more likely than 3 men coming in to burgle a house and just ending up taking a baby as well. I'm doubtful, but I do hope Kyrie survived that day and that he is just being taken care of by someone. Maybe if the suspects kidnapped him and sold him on to another family that genuinely will look after him. His mother believes this to be the case and doesn't think that Gwen or Jeff are lying about what happened that day. Here is an age-progressed image showing what Kyrie may have looked like at about age 14, around 6 years ago. If you have any information or think you may have seen Kyrie since his disappearance, please contact the Miami-Dade Police Department. I know the likelihood of recognising a 19-year-old man from photos only showing him as a baby is extremely small, but if you have any suspicions or have seen or heard anything strange over the last 19 years, it's worth reporting. Even if it doesn't solve this case, it may help in another. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Thursday in a new video.